Slavery was a common and widespread practice in ancient Rome. It's estimated that there were millions of slaves in the Roman Empire, making up 25% of the population. Slaves had no legal rights and were considered the property of their owners, who could use them for any purpose they wished. But what was life like for female slaves in ancient Rome? What kind of work did they have to do? How were they treated by their masters? And did they have any chance of freedom or resistance? Let's find out. Female slaves in ancient Rome had to perform various kinds of work depending on their skills, abilities, and the needs of their masters. Many female slaves worked as household servants, doing tasks such as cooking, cleaning, sewing, spinning, weaving, and taking care of children and animals. They also had to serve their masters and guests at meals and parties, often wearing elaborate hairstyles and makeup to enhance their appearance. Some were also trained as hairdressers, cosmeticians, masseuses, or musicians to entertain their masters. Some female slaves worked on farms and estates, doing tasks such as planting, harvesting, threshing, winemaking, cheese making, and animal husbandry. They also had to endure harsh weather conditions, long hours, and physical exhaustion. Some were also used as breeders to produce more slaves for their masters. Some female slaves worked in workshops and factories, doing tasks such as pottery making, textile production, metalworking, leatherworking, and construction. They also had to deal with dangerous machinery, toxic materials, and poor ventilation. Some were also used as miners to extract metals and minerals from the earth. Some female slaves worked in shops and markets, doing tasks such as selling goods, keeping account, collecting debts, and delivering orders. They also had to interact with customers, negotiate prices, and handle money. Some were also used as bankers or moneylenders to lend money to their masters or other clients. Some female slaves worked as professionals, doing tasks such as teaching, writing, translating, accounting, medicine, law, or art. They also had to demonstrate high levels of education, intelligence, and creativity. Some were also used as spies or diplomats to gather information or conduct negotiations for their masters. Some female slaves worked as religious personnel, doing tasks such as serving as priestesses, Vestal virgins who tended the sacred fire of Vesta, oracles who delivered divine messages, or sibyls who prophesied the future. They also had to follow strict rules of conduct and ritual purity. Some were also used as sacrificial victims to appease the gods or curse the enemies. Female slaves were subjected to various forms of treatment by their masters. Many suffered physical abuse by their masters or overseers. They could be whipped, beaten, burned, branded, maimed, or even killed for any reason or no reason at all. They could also be tortured for interrogation or punishment. Some female slaves were also forced to fight as gladiators or wild beasts in the arena for the amusement of their masters or the public. For example, in the 1st century AD, a female slave named Eunice was crucified along with 400 other rebels after a failed uprising in Sicily. Another example is the case of Blandina, a Christian slave who was tortured and killed by wild animals in the amphitheater of Leon in 177 AD. She was tied to a stake and exposed to a bull, a bear, and a leopard, but none of them attacked her. She was then thrown into a net and dragged by a bull until she died. Many female slaves suffered sexual exploitation by their masters or others. They could be raped, molested, prostituted, or forced into concubinage, a form of sexual slavery, by their owners or anyone they authorized. They could also be exposed to sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, abortions, or infanticide. Some of these practices were sanctioned by law or custom, such as the ius prime noctis, or the rite of the first night, which allowed the master to have sex with a newly married female slave on her wedding night, or the exposure of unwanted infants, especially girls, to die or to be picked up by slave traders. Some were also forced to undergo genital mutilation or castration for aesthetic or religious reasons. For example, in the 2nd century BC, a Roman senator named Cato the Elder castrated his female slaves who had sex with his male slaves to prevent them from producing more slaves. Another example is the practice of infibulation, which involved piercing and closing the labia of female slaves to prevent them from having intercourse. This was done to either preserve their virginity for sale or to prevent them from becoming pregnant by unauthorized partners. These examples show how female slaves in ancient Rome were treated as sexual objects and deprived of their dignity and autonomy. Many female slaves suffered social discrimination. They could be humiliated, insulted, mocked, or even ridiculed for their status, appearance, or behavior. They could also be denied basic human rights such as food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, education, or even religion. Some were also forced to wear distinctive marks or badges to identify them as slaves. For example, some female slaves had to wear a metal collar around their neck with inscriptions such as "I am a slave of X" or "Stop me if I run away." Another example is the practice of branding, which involved marking the skin of female slaves with letters or symbols to indicate their ownership or crimes. These marks were often visible and painful and served as a reminder of their lowly status and vulnerability. For example, in the 1st century AD, a female slave named Octi was publicly shamed by Nero's wife Poppaea for being his former concubine. She was accused of seducing Nero and plotting against Poppaea, who forced her to confess and then banished her from the palace. Another example is the law of Augustus that required female slaves who were freed by their masters to wear a yellow headband to distinguish them from freeborn women. This was done to prevent them from marrying Roman citizens or enjoying the privileges of citizenship. Female slaves in ancient Rome had few opportunities for freedom or resistance. Some female slaves were granted freedom by their masters, either voluntarily or by law. This could happen for various reasons, such as gratitude, affection, merit, old age, or the death of the master. Manumitted slaves were called freed women and gained some legal and social rights, such as citizenship, property, marriage, or inheritance. However, they still had to maintain a bond of loyalty and service to their former masters, who became their patrons. Some female slaves tried to escape from their masters, either alone or in groups. This could happen for various reasons, such as depression, rebellion, adventure, or love. Escaped slaves were called fugitives and faced many dangers and difficulties, such as recapture, punishment, starvation, or violence. They had to hide from the authorities, who posted rewards for their capture and employed slave hunters to track them down. They also had to survive in harsh environments such as forests, mountains, or deserts, where they faced hunger, thirst, cold, or heat. They also had to defend themselves from hostile people or animals who might attack them or betray them. Some escaped slaves joined outlaw bands or slave revolts, such as the famous one led by Spartacus in 73 to 71 BC. They hoped to find freedom, justice, or revenge by fighting against their oppressors. However, they often faced overwhelming odds and brutal repression by the Roman army. For example, Spartacus's revolt involved about 120,000 slaves at its peak, but was eventually crushed by Crassus and Pompey in 71 BC. About 6,000 surviving rebels were crucified along the Appian Way as a warning to others. Some female slaves chose to end their lives rather than endure slavery. This could happen for various reasons, such as despair, honor, protest, or sacrifice. Suicide was considered a noble and heroic act by some Roman writers, such as Seneca and Tacitus, who praised the examples of female slaves who kill themselves rather than submit to their masters. As we've learned, female slaves in ancient Rome had to do many things for their masters. They were not a homogeneous group, but a diverse and complex one. They also had different hopes, dreams, and aspirations. They weren't just objects of history, but subjects of history. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought about this topic. See you next time, and bye for now.